Hello, my name is Kirsten Schnell. I'm a fourth grade teacher in Northern Colorado, and this is the Crazy Cat Classroom. Welcome back to my channel. If you haven't already, make sure you hit that subscribe button and hit that notification bell so that you are notified every single time I upload a new video. If you watched my last week's video, which will be linked right up here, I went over some books that I felt teachers should peruse through over our summer break. And some of you gave me suggestions on trauma-based PD, which was fabulous. So thank you so much for doing that. Now I want to kind of switch gears from the teacher to the student. So this year I really set out to read more books that directly correlated with the grade that I taught. I am dyslexic, and so reading doesn't really come easy for me. And it's very difficult to find books that I enjoy enough to power through reading. And I know that reading is so important, especially for struggling readers, because the only way you truly get better is through practice. And that could be audiobooks, it could be just reading the book, but it's that everyday practice of the language that will help you be a better reader, especially in English. So, that all being said, I thought that I should do a video of what are some of my favorite middle-age novels. Now, these are all fiction. I prefer fiction, so I am biased in my opinion. However, I know that I do have a lot of students who are interested in nonfiction, and I don't sway them from reading nonfiction because that would be silly. As long as they're reading what they want to read, I am totally fine with that. Just so that you know that this video may be biased in the sense that it's strictly it's all fiction. Also, I grew up in a very diverse neighborhood. I was very fortunate in that way, and so I know the importance of hearing stories that are different from our own. So I really tried hard to include voices from people and backgrounds that my students might not have any background knowledge in. Right now in America, we are having a lot of protests for the Black Lives Matter movement, and I just want you to know as the viewer that I consciously know my white privilege and my biases, and that I try very purposefully to include different perspectives and different backgrounds in my reading. And I think because of the school that I went to and the people that I grew up with, and my friend group growing up, that I was very fortunate in knowing that there are people who do not have the same story as me and who have very different backgrounds and very different needs, whether that's based on race or any other differences. So that being said, I just wanted to put that out there, that I am very conscious in what I read and what I try to encourage my students to read, because my students live in a rural area and the diverse population at our school is not very high. So I just want to put that out there in saying that I feel these books are very well represented as far as having a diverse picture of the world around us. So that being said, let's get on to the books I suggest. Now, most of these books are either in my classroom or through remote learning. I didn't have a chance to actually have the physical book in front of me, so I read it off of my Kindle. So all the books, I'll be putting a picture right there for you. So if you watched any of my previous videos, you know that I'm a visual learner, and I know that when I go to the library, I try to visually see that cover, so the cover will help you there. I know that some libraries are still closed. Ours are opened with minimal, it's like curbside pickup, but just so you know that I am putting the picture there so that if you go onto the internet or peruse anywhere, you will be able to find that book. Okay? And I'll have all the books linked through Amazon in the description box below. It's not through my personal Amazon account or anything like that. I'm not getting any money for you clicking on those links. I just want to make it so that the buying process is easier for you. However, I'm not encouraging you to buy any of these books. I really, really believe in our public library system. And I know that my local public library has an amazing wide range of online resources that your child or students or you yourself, if you're a student, can go and access. So I highly suggest that. They have PDF versions if you have to read it on your computer, if you have a tablet at home, just so you know that those resources are out there for you. I also know that not everyone has a device at home, so that's the other reason why I linked those down below. Okay? All right, let's get into the books. So this first book I just finished. It is a graphic novel. However, it's the first graphic novel to ever win the Newbery Award, which I think is awesome. Being a visual learner and being someone who is dyslexic, graphic novels were not a thing for me growing up, and I think that if they were a thing, I would have really grabbed onto it. I think graphic novels get a bad rap because it's primarily pictures, but students are still reading. They're still interacting with the text. They have to use context clues to figure out what do pictures mean, what's happening in the background. And so I really feel like graphic novels get a really bad rap, and I don't know why, because you have to use a lot of comprehension skills visually to pinpoint what is happening in the story, because the only thing that you read is their speech. It's almost like a play. And so I am a very big fan of graphic novels. I read a lot of them because my kids are interested in them. And if my kids are interested in graphic novels, I'm going to take the time to read them. So, this one is called The New Kid, and it's by Jerry Craft. And this is about a student who lives in the inner city but gets a scholarship or a grant to a really good school. And I think it's a very important book, especially for the time that we live in. Just about certain discriminatory things that people say and do that they don't realize it's discriminatory. There are some things that may go over the head of a 9 or 10-year-old, but I think it's super important for your 11 through 13, even higher students or children to read, because of the importance of those racist biases that we don't even realize that we're doing, because we think it's fine and it's not. So I highly suggest that book. The second book I highly suggest is called Walk Two Moons, and it's by Sharon Creech. This is a book about a girl. She's Native American, and she goes on a road trip with her grandparents to Idaho to visit her mom. Her mom left her dad and her a while back, and she hasn't seen her mom since. While she's on this road trip with her grandparents, they talk about how her life has been since moving to Ohio, so you kind of get the flashbacks. Now, I read this book with a higher reading group in 4th grade, and they loved it. I loved it. It's a very touching story, and it's definitely one that I continue to circle back to as one of my favorite middle-aged novels. It is a Newbery Award-winning novel. Not that that has anything to do with it, but if the sticker makes you think that it's better or not, there you have it. And it's just so beautifully written in the sense of there are certain figurative language in it that comes up over and over again and kind of has this rhythm to it. But I think what's really beautiful is that it really discusses the theme of sometimes things are not what they seem. The third book that I suggest is called Roll With It by Jamie Summer. And this book I read over remote learning or COVID-19 time. So I just finished it recently. And I loved this book. There's that quote out there that says that books are windows and mirrors and sliding glass doors. And this book was a mirror. The main character in it has cerebral palsy. I do not have cerebral palsy, first off, but I've worked with a student who had cerebral palsy. And so I could really relate in that aspect of things of having a student who has had cerebral palsy. However, the mirror aspect is that this girl wants to be a famous baker. And she and her mom move in with her grandparents due to certain things that are happening in her grandparents' lives. And she wants to enter the baking contest in their town. And it's just a phenomenal book. And when I was younger, I wanted to be a baker. And so I know that that's the mirror aspect of things, but I think it's really beautiful that I could get to step into someone's shoes who has cerebral palsy. I loved this book. I suggested it to one of my students who loves to bake. And yeah, it was really, really touching and really, really good. Moving on, my fourth suggestion is Ghost by Jason Reynolds. This is the first book of the running series. I haven't read any of the other books. However, this is the first book of the series and I really, really enjoyed it. It's a very quick read and it's one of those books that you just don't want to put down. It's about a boy who grows up in the inner city and comes across this group of track runners or a running club. And he sees all these kids and he's like, I can run faster than that, due to some of his backstory in the case that he has had to run away from a lot of difficult things. And so he gets on the track and runs. And he runs so fast that he gets asked to join the track group. So it's about his story, and the whole running series is about the 4 youngest kids in the track group or club, and it's just so good. The writing makes you just want to continue reading. So I just highly suggest that book. Again, it's like a window to seeing someone else's life and seeing how, like, the differences in growing up. My 5th and 6th suggestion is by the same author. And it's a series, so I'm going to put them both up here. The first one's called The City of Ghosts, and the second one is called The Tunnel of Bones. And they're both by Victoria Schwab. And I highly suggest these books because my students are really getting into like spooky stories. And these are phenomenal. I listened to both through audiobook, and just the picture that is painted in your head through the author's words is phenomenal. The person who does the audio reading does different voices for different characters, and I love that. And it just really brings the story to life. The series is about this girl who has parents who are ghost hunters. And what's really interesting is that the mom truly believes in ghosts and the dad really doesn't believe in ghosts. He more sees it as historical information. And so with the two together combined, they create this TV show of going to these historical places and seeing ghosts or talking about ghost stories. So it's very fascinating in the sense that they're in middle-aged novels. Parents are not usually part of the story, but the parents in these stories have a crucial role because the cities and the places that the main character visits, she wouldn't be able to visit if it wasn't for her parents. So they play a major important role in the plot. And our character had a near-death experience, which caused her to see ghosts. It talks about helping ghosts get to the other side and difference between ghosts and poltergeists. And so that very spiritual spookiness these two books have. And they are phenomenal. Like I said, I listened to the audiobook and I loved it. And I shared the first audiobook, The City of Ghosts, with my class over the October Halloween season, and they loved it. And so I highly suggest, if you haven't read these books, go out and read them. They're so good. There's the audiobook if you want to listen to that instead, but highly suggest. The next book, so this is number 7, is Restart by Gordon Corman. Now, I've never read Gordon Corman books before, but I know that he's really, really popular, especially in middle-aged novels. And over COVID, I saw that one of the books was available through my public library to read on my Kindle. And so I was like, you know what? My kids enjoy these books. I'm going to read one of the Gordon Corman books because I have it. Oh my goodness. What have I been doing with my life? It was so good. It was so good. It's about a boy who gets amnesia through falling off his roof. And you don't know why or how or what happened in making him first be on his roof and second falling off his roof. But all you know is that he has amnesia. He kind of learns about who he was before his amnesia. And he finds out that he wasn't that great of a person. It really talks about it doesn't matter where you are at, you can always restart. You can always have a new start. All right, moving on. Just like I did, this is by the same author, and it's kind of a series. It's more of a continuation, a story continuation. So, the first book is The One and Only Ivan by Catherine Applegate, and then the second book is The One and Only Bob by Catherine Applegate. So, looking at The One and Only Ivan first, I read this book when I was a student teacher. I had never read this book before, and to be honest, being a dyslexic person, I was a little intimidated by the thickness. But once I cracked it open and I saw the spacing between the words and the shortness of the chapters, I was excited. And it makes you feel like you are reading very, very quickly and that you have an endpoint. So, as for someone who gets easily distracted, you're not like, oh, what chapter was I on? Oh yeah, I was on one more thing. Okay, so there are many reasons why I love this book. When I was a student teacher, I had moved to Colorado, and all of my family still live in Washington. And I read this book, and after reading it, I cried, first off. Secondly, I called my mom because I grew up in Tacoma, Washington. And in Tacoma, Washington, there was this mall called the B&I, and they had a gorilla living in the mall named Ivan. Now, I never saw Ivan. He left before I got to see him in the mall. But my parents remember Ivan and saw Ivan in the B&I mall. So I called up my mom and I said, Mom, was gorillas in malls like a really popular thing when you were growing up? And she's like, I don't know. And I said, well, this lady wrote the one and only Ivan. Was the gorilla's name in the B&I mall called Ivan? Yeah, it was. And my heart just dropped. I'm getting emotional because I care a lot about animals. I'm in the crazy cat classroom because I love my cat. And though I'm not against hunting or having you be vegan because of animals. I'm not against anything like that. But I do think that I have a heart for animals, and when they're treated not very well, that's when I get upset, and that's when I get emotional. So this book talks about that, about Ivan, who lived in a mall, and his story on how he gets out of living in the mall, and how his whole purpose isn't for him to get out of the mall, but to help someone else get out of the mall. And so it just talks about the selfless nature of Ivan and how he's very selfless, in the sense that his purpose wasn't for him to get out of the mall. It was to get his friend out of it. And you might see who his friend is by the cover. It's a beautiful story. And anyone who had ever seen Ivan or grew up knowing the stories of Ivan, who grew up around the Tacoma, Seattle area, this book I think will affect you very, very differently than people who didn't, because it's very personal. Yeah. So, sorry, I'm getting teary-eyed, but one of my all-time favorites. So the one and only Ivan. Now, Catherine Applegate just got finished with writing and publishing the one and only Bob, and I am in the middle of reading that book. Now, that book is about the story of Bob, which you find out who Bob is in the one and only Ivan. He's a dog that lives in the mall, and at the end of the book, you find out that he gets adopted by a family. So at the beginning of the one and only Bob, you kind of learn Bob's beginning, like how did he come to live in the mall with Ivan, and then his story after he was adopted and what has happened. Now I'm kind of at the climactic point of the story, so I don't know how it's going to end. I do know that I did feel that the beginning was a little bit on the slower side because there was so much information that Catherine Applegate had to fill in. I get the reason why she had to do that, right? We need to know Bob's backstory. We needed to know why did he get into the mall. It's definitely becoming quicker and quicker to read, and I only have about 25% left of the book to read. So I'm very excited to see what happens in that 25%. So those are two books that I suggest. Moving right along, the next book I suggest, I might not have 9 or 10-year-olds read, but more 11 and 12-year-olds. And into like 7th grade. Other Words from Home, and this is by Jasmine Warg, and this is a beautiful story. I was very fortunate in learning about Islamic culture in my undergrad as an art history major. And this story is about a Muslim girl who comes to the United States to live after being kind of forced out of her neighborhood. Her and her mom come to the United States to have her have a better life, and she has to leave behind her dad and her brother and her best friend, and that's really hard. So it talks about, one, that transition. So that's why I say maybe for a higher age kid to really understand and comprehend the seriousness of what's happening. But the second reason why I suggest a higher age kid is because the girl does mature into a woman through this book. And it talks about how she goes from not wearing a hijab to wearing a hijab, and how people look at her differently after she starts wearing the hijab, and how that's just part of her culture and that's part of her belief, and that as a society we should accept that and embrace that. But because it's different, we see it as other, and we don't understand the importance of, if you don't understand the Islamic culture, you don't understand the importance of the hijab and how it's a celebration. And what I loved about this book is that it really talked about how this is a celebration in their community. So that's the reason why I suggest for a little bit more mature students, our students who have already gone through their womanly change. And so, yes, I suggest that book. It's beautiful. It's written very poetically. It's a very, very lovely book. So, the next book I suggest is a graphic novel, and it's Ghosts by I'm going to say this name wrong. Telegrammer. I'm saying it with confidence, so I apologize if I butchered that name. I'm just really bad with names, and being dyslexic does not help. So I apologize. But this was one of the first graphic novels I read because I noticed that it won an award in Colorado for Young Colorado Readers Award. And I was really interested in graphic novels because I was a 6th grade English teacher, and I had a bunch of kids who told me that their interest was in graphic novels. So this book is amazing. I love it. And I know that she writes a lot of other graphic novel books, but this is the first one that I picked up, and I just loved it. It's about us 2 sisters, and how in the town that they live in, the Day of the Dead is a very important celebration. And they have ancestors that they want to see, and it just talks about the Day of the Dead as a way to see our ancestors again. And it's a quick read. I read it in like a day because it's a graphic novel. So highly, highly suggest. The next book is called Refugee by Alan Grates. Now, I have a lot of boys, at least this last year, who really liked historical fiction, particularly World War II historical fiction. And so Alan Grates was the author that I kind of directed those boys to, because he writes a lot of historical fiction. His next book, I'm really excited, is about September 11th, because a lot of my students had never experienced September 11th, and I have. So I'm really excited to read that book and suggest it to my students. Anyways, but Alan Grates, Refugee, I loved this book. I'm not a super big historical fiction fan, which is hilarious because I loved it as a kid. But what I really loved about this book was the different perspectives. So, at first, there are 3 perspectives in the story. The first one is a Jewish boy who's a refugee who's trying to come to America. The second, through the World War II era. The second one is about a girl who lives in Cuba who is trying to come to the United States as a refugee in the 1990s. And then the third one is about a Syrian boy who tries to leave their country as a refugee. So what I love is the parallels between all of these stories, the difficulties that all the characters had to face while trying to reach their end goal of leaving their country, the little red threads that connect each story to each other, and just that window into seeing their lives as a refugee. Now, some of my students didn't like this because of the different perspectives, and they were getting confused between, okay, is this about the Jewish boy? Is this about the girl? Is this about the Syrian boy? So maybe more 5th grade, but I feel like definitely a good middle-aged novel. Definitely 5th and 6th grade. My 6th graders loved it. So this book I picked up at Barnes & Noble while I was in Washington over winter break visiting my family. And I wanted a book to read on the plane that was very quick. And I ended up loving this book. And this book is called Moo by Sharon Creech. She was the same author that wrote Walk Two Moons. And what I loved about this book is that it's definitely a mirror for my students. It talks about this brother and sister who moved from the city to the rural parts of Maine. And in Maine, the main character, which is the sister, meets this older woman who has a farm and who has a cow. And her name is Mrs. Falala, which is fun to read out loud. And Mrs. Falala needs help taking care of her cow. And so the girl helps Mrs. Falala, and then eventually the girl goes into showing the cow at city fairs, so through 4-H type of thing. And my students who live in rural areas do participate in 4-H. Do you understand the story of living in a rural area? They're not that far away from Denver, so they get the idea of the big city and coming from a big city. So I highly suggest this book, especially as near for your students who may live in rural areas, or as a window if you are a teacher who teaches in the inner city and they might not understand what 4-H is. So it's a very quick read. The font that Sharon Creech uses to emphasize different words and the poetic nature of this book I just love. So highly suggest. All right, moving on. This is another graphic novel. It's called Stargazing, and it's by Jen Wong. And this is a book that follows a girl, and she's Chinese, and her family sees this other family in need. And so they offer their kind of guest house, or their house kind of behind their house, for this mom and child to live. And the child is another girl, and they are Buddhists, so they eat vegetarian, and that's very different from the Chinese girl, who they aren't Buddhists and they eat pork. And so seeing the clashings of different belief systems there is very interesting. It also talks about the differences between families. So one family is a mother and a girl, and the other family is a mother, a father, and 2 girls. The girl who has the mother and father takes Mandarin classes, and the girl who's a mother but not a father, that's not her cup of tea, but she loves K-pop. She loves it. And I love how this book mentions K-pop. And so she brings in that culture to the Chinese girl. And it's just this wonderful way of how, even though two people can be so different, how they can just become friends. Oh, it's just so lovely. I'm almost done. 2 more books. Okay, the first one is The Wish Tree by Catherine Applegate. The main character is a tree, and the tree tries to help this girl find a friend. And the reason why this girl is having such a difficult time finding a friend is because you can inference that she's Middle Eastern, and that the community that her and her family moved into may not be the most inclusive. Let me just say. And so The Wish Tree is this beautiful story about how this tree is trying to help this girl find a friend, because it was her wish that she put on the wish tree to find a friend. And it's the wish tree's job to make the wish come true. It's a lovely story about accepting people for their differences and having this hope for the world. What's really interesting is how certain natural things like a tree can bring a community together, because the tree is in jeopardy of getting cut down, but you read throughout the book about how this tree is a habitat for all these animals to live in. And so it's not only important for the community to realize the impact that this tree has in their community, but also the fact that this tree has an impact in the very nature that it's a habitat for so many animals. So I love Catherine Applegate. I'm biased in that way. She did write The One and Only Ivan. But I highly suggest this book. If you haven't already read it, it's lovely. And it's like The One and Only Ivan, where it's a very quick read. So, and the pictures are gorgeous in that book. So, all right. And the very last book that I'm going to suggest for middle-aged students to read is, no surprise if you know me, it is the Harry Potter series. Now, I have just reread the first Harry Potter book, and I'm about to reread the second Harry Potter book here soon. But I highly suggest these books. One, because they were the books that made me fall in love with reading. I did not like to read, and then all of a sudden, my 5th grade teacher, during our lunch hour, because we ate lunch in our classroom, that's how small that elementary school was, during our lunchtime, she would play Harry Potter as a on tape, and we would listen to it as we ate our lunch. And what was really great was, as we ate our lunch, we could kind of discuss what's happening in the story. And to this day, I am so thankful that that teacher, I know that so many people have stories about how Harry Potter has changed their life, but Harry Potter literally changed my life for the better, because it taught me to love to read. I think that with the new covers, it's really catching some of my students' eyes of like, ooh, Mrs. Schnell, like, I've never read Harry Potter but because of these new covers, I'm kind of interested. It kind of has that kind of old-fashioned look to them. I really am digging the new covers. And J.K. Rowling has a Harry Potter at Home, where all of the books are available through your local library in all different languages to access at home. And I just love it. So that's my very last suggestion. I hope you enjoyed these suggestions. Like I said, I try to vary the differences in seeing how some of these books can be mirrors, as some of these books can be windows, and some of these books can be sliding glass doors into worlds that we would have never, ever imagined our lives being a part of. I love books that help connect people. I love books that help us understand each other better, and I really feel that these books do that. So that being said, if you have any suggestions of books that I should read that are middle-aged novels, please leave them in a link down below. If you would like me to do another review but on young adult novels, please hit that like button, because I also love young adult novels and they're some of my favorite books to read personally. Make sure that you subscribe to my channel and ding that notification bell so that you are notified anytime that I upload a new video. Thank you so much for watching my channel. Always remember that when you believe in yourself, you can change the world. See ya!